Today's topic is the study of the human skeletal system. We won't quite finish it today. We'll have to finish up part of this tomorrow. The bones in a person's body are living organs, and they contain blood vessels and nerves and fat tissues and blood cell forming tissues. Now, what's the actual purpose of the skeleton? The first thing that we could think about is that it's a framework for support of the body and for the protection of the delicate organs such as the brain, the spinal cord, the heart, and the lungs. And the bone serves also as levers, and with the muscular system you can produce movement. The bones also serve as a storage area for minerals that when your body take in more than you need, your body can store some of it there that it can use later on, maybe for mending bones or recovering from an injury or something like that. So the two chemicals or the two minerals that are stored within that are going to be calcium, which I think you're probably most familiar with, and also phosphorus. And then also the bones have the interior, the bone marrow is involved in blood cell production. So blood cells are formed inside the bone marrow of some of our bones. Now the human skeletal system has primary two parts. We have the axial skeleton, and you can see it here. We have the skull, the ribs, and the spinal cord, and a small wedge-shaped portion there of your hips make up the axial skeleton. And then you have the appendicular skeleton. Those are all your appendages. So that would be your shoulder blades and your arms, your hips, and your legs would make up that part. The bones, like in the skull, for instance, you can see the fine little wavy lines that go in the skull. As your skull enlarges, when you're born, the pieces that make up your skull are not fused all together as they are as an adult. And in an adult, you can see the little suture lines is where the pieces have met and become one solid piece. When you're first born, these pieces have gaps in between where it allows the head to fit through the birth canal. It also allows the head to grow and the brain to grow so that they aren't fused in one piece. So the fontanelle is just the gaps that you have when you're first born. So the long bone of the body, we have long bones and short bones. The long bone has two basic regions. We have the diaphysis, or the shaft of the bone, which is the region, and then we have the epiphysis, which is the ends of the bone. Then the ends of the bone are covered with a cartilage, a thin layer of smooth, it's kind of bluish white in color, and this articular cartilage, the articular means they articulate, that means they meet at a place and they can move back and forth. So they cover the ends of the bone, and this cartilage layer provides for smooth movement at the joints. Then the diaphysis of the bone is covered with a layer of dense white fibrous tissue called the periosteum, and that's responsible for giving a place for the muscles to attach. It's also responsible for helping the bone to grow or to repair if you should break a bone. The bone marrow, which is the inside of the diaphysis, is actually hollow, and this cavity usually extends the entire length of the diaphysis. Lining the inside of the marrow cavity is the endosteum, and like the periosteum, it's involved in bone growth and repair. So this bone can repair itself from the inside and the outside. And in young people, that bone marrow is filled mostly with just red bone marrow, which is soft tissue, and it produces the red blood cells. As you become older, it's replaced by yellow bone marrow, which is actually more fatty tissue inside of that bone. Then the wall of the diaphysis is mainly of compact bone. This is where you have tightly packed tissue with very few spaces on there. So it's kind of like the strongest part of the bone. And the epiphysis, the ends of the bone, as you can see in the diagram, are made up of spongy bone. It's a lot more hollow space inside of there that's not made out of bone. So we have this compact on the outside, the spongy bone on the inside, and that's just in the epiphysis. Along the diaphysis, it's just compact bone. The bone microstructure, most bones have a veneer of compact bone tissue covering the spongy bone tissue, and a common feature of all compact bone is this Hyversion system. And the Hyversion system, as you can see in the diagram, is like one of those sets of concentric circles. And the Hyversion system makes up the compact bone. It's kind of like our unit of bone. You know, many of these are fit together. You can see all these circles, how they fit together. And it also consists of blood vessels and some hard matrix that's in the inside. And surrounding this layers of hard matrix are the lamellae. You can see that in the diagram. And then between the layers of matrix, it's filled with spaces called lacunae. And in the diagram, they are trying to show you that. They're on the kind of like to the right, lower right of the diagram. They have the arrows pointing to the lacunae. And in the lacunae, which I said were these fluid-filled spaces, there are inside of those are the osteocytes. And these osteocytes are actually the living bone cells. They're the one that really make the bone and cause the healing and things like that. Now there's little tiny canals that bring nourishment from the central blood vessels to these osteocytes. So that's how they derive their nourishment, the minerals and stuff they need to make the bone. Here is a diagram of a bone slide, and you can see in the center of this diagram is the Hyversion system. Here is that same thing, maybe a little bit larger, and in the very center is where the blood vessel will be. through which all this system derives its nourishment through little tiny little canals. Those little lines that radiate out from the center are those canals that we were talking about. And then these open spaces that we talked about there that are filled with fluid are the lacunae. And the lacunae get their nourishment from the blood vessel out through these little tiny canals. The skeletal system of a adult human consists of two main types of connective tissue. We have cartilage and bone. The bone gives a rigid support while the cartilage is flexible. So cartilage isn't hard, it can bend, like the cartilage that you have, like like in your nose and your ear, for instance. Now, the cartilage usually doesn't contain blood vessels, and so that makes it a little bit harder to heal, often requiring surgery if it becomes damaged. So it doesn't have blood vessels. The word, remember, that we meant for that is something, tissue that doesn't have blood vessels is called avascular. So the cartilage is found on the ends of bones, and we said also it's in your nose and ears, and it's also at the ends of the ribs where they touch your sternum, which is your breastbone, so that they can flex while breathing. And an embryo's tiny skeleton begins mostly with cartilage. There is some bone, but it's mostly cartilage. So here is a diagram of kind of what happens when you're little. Your bone starts out with mostly cartilage, and the process of becoming filled with bone or being replaced by bone is called ossification. So it's just a conversion of cartilage into bone. So you start out mostly with cartilage, and then there are a couple places in that cartilage area where bones will start to grow and form. There's one kind of like in the center of a long bone, and then there's one at the end. One of them will make the epiphysis, the other part will make the diaphysis. And in between those two areas is called the epiphyseal growth plate. So we have the diaphysis, that's the middle part of the bone, and then we have the epiphysis, that's the end of the bone, and in between we have an area of cartilage that's being replaced by bone, and it's called the epiphyseal plate. So when you are young and you break a bone, since it's not made of solid bone, is one of the places that a break can occur, and doctors are often concerned about a break there because that could interfere with that bone's ability to grow in length, because if it fuses solid right there, then that bone will have stopped growing. So in between the epiphysis and the diaphysis are cells that are cartilage, and so it's a little bit more flexible and it's more easily injured. And so when it tends to grow, it will tend to grow outward in that direction. So the epiphysis will get farther from the diaphysis as more and more bone is built in the epiphyseal plate. So the bone's going to go through stages as it develops. First of all, the bone's going to grow in length, and it does that at the epiphyseal plate, as we saw in the previous slide where the cartilage is. The cartilage is going to be replaced by bone uh, and make the epiphysis farther from the diaphysis. It will also grow in diameter, and the periosteum is responsible for that. Remember, that's kind of like the outside, the skin of the bone, and that's where the muscles are attached to the periosteum, but the periosteum is also responsible for growing, creating more compact bone around the outside. The specialized osteocytes called osteoclasts make the marrow cavity larger, otherwise it would be the same size when you were first born. So these osteoclasts make the marrow cavity larger by just kind of eating away at the bone, and the body is very efficient at recycling, so it'll use it to make bone on the outside. So it's eaten away on the inside and built up on the outside. And as the bone grows, bones continually need calcium in order to form the matrix of this of each new Herversian system. And vitamin D is also needed along with the calcium so that it can be absorbed, so the calcium can be absorbed into the blood. And this process of bone development will continue throughout the years that you're growing up until in the mid-20s it usually stops growing in most adults. And that's the end of our section for today.